In 5, 4, 3, 2, go, Caryn Ryan. I'm kidding. We were live. We're good. Caryn, thank you very much for coming back.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. When did the new guidelines come out?
You remember a week ago we did a webinar? They came out on that very day, but late in the day. So they've been out for a week. They came out after the webinar, of course, which I was trying to decide, was that better than coming out? Do you remember the first webinar we did on April 3? The interim final regulations came out the night before at like 10 o'clock. So then I had to spend a lot of the night kind of going through those and fixing the presentation. I kind of thought, well, this might be better that it comes out after the webinar.
Yeah, no, that was good. It came out after. You've had a week to digest it and figure things out. I'm really looking forward to your guidance and your guidelines. I got to tell you that, we received ours in our office, and I received something from my bank that said, we'll be providing guidelines to you on June 24th. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. June 24th is when they're going to tell me what I have to do and how I've got to be accountable for 6, 7, 8 weeks, whatever. The June 29th is, I think we've got to have this all wrapped up. And what do I do between now and then? So that's why we've got Caryn. And again, I just really, really appreciate all the time you put into this. And we're learning. You've got about a couple people from our office I know that are working on this project with me or watching as well. So thank you, Caryn. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, happy to be here. And I think the banks feel, just by the way, pretty confident about the June 24th because quite a few people are going to need to wait until June 30 to see if they're, can actually qualify for the safe harbor of returning people to their prior salaries and returning to the full-time equivalent pay that they had at the beginning of the PPP period. So that's why I think the banks are thinking, okay, we can delay this a little bit. But the good news is that the basic application is here, and just like with the PPP loan itself, we do expect the banks will use this basic application. They may put it into a new form, they may put it online, to make it simpler to do. But what we saw is that at least the application process did not vary much from bank to bank. It was very, very similar. Right. So going through this webinar, you're going to see the SBA suggested forgiveness application, and therefore you can have the confidence that in whatever form it comes from your bank, you're going to have most of the material that you need for it.
Okay, great.
A disclaimer up front, Missionwell is a virtual office service, and we support churches and religious organizations and nonprofits, and we provide a whole bunch of services, gift handling, accounting, human resources, financial consulting, commercial reviews, but we are not a couple things. We are not attorneys and we are not CPAs. So this does not constitute any kind of legal advice, and it doesn't constitute advice from a CPA. What this really, what we are, and so what this represents is just a bunch of people who work with our business partners, and we do these loan applications for them. We're starting to work on forgiveness applications. We're doing the budgeting for the period of forgiveness right now for a lot of our business partners. And so because we're doing it for so many people, we end up needing to go and check all the rules and check all the guidance ourselves. And so we're pleased then that we can bring this to more ministries and more churches and more nonprofits. Today, we'll cover the big thing that's new since the webinar last week, which is at long last, the loan forgiveness application is available. I want to say right up front that does not mean all questions are answered. There are a lot of unanswered questions, and I'm sure that as you send your questions today via the chat, we'll look and we'll answer what we can, and hopefully a lot of them will get answered through this webinar. But you're going to find at the end, we'll kind of summarize up what we still don't know, and you'll see that there's still a lot that we don't know, and that's no different than it was, as you recall, from the PPP loan application itself. Everything's happening so quickly that not all of the guidance is there that we need to finish the application. But I think we've gone we've taken a big leap forward from last week. We're going to walk through the concepts and we're going to walk through the application. I'm going to really focus on the concepts because the application, it kind of can feel like when you're filling it out, like you're back in April 15th IRS tax land. So if we really get the concepts, if you understand the concepts, it's going to make filling out the application easier. And you can just kind of keep going, okay, I know what this is, I know where we're going, I know what we need to get to, and make sure, you know, the application is conceptually is matching what you think should happen, you know, when you're done. So I hope that this will help you actually, you know, because there's still so many unanswered questions, hope will help you manage the complexity of the forgiveness topic, and at least some of your questions will be answered, if not all of them. And then if for whichever ones are unanswered, we're going to give you some suggestions for what to do. So the topics we're going to cover today is an overview of the program. The loan forgiveness application itself is going to be 90% of this presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end for whatever time remains, and answer what we can. Okay, so this is the Paycheck Protection Program overview. I've got a big orange box around the parts that we're going to focus on today, but just as a reminder, this the CARES Act was passed on March 13th, and in 2 tranches, money was provided for this Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP program, for forgivable loans. The forgivable part of the loan is if you use the loan to cover your payroll costs and most mortgage interest or rent or utility costs over an 8-week period, and that period is called the covered period. So it's the period that's covered from a forgiveness perspective after the loan is disbursed. We'll go through this again another time, but I'll mention right now that your forgiveness period starts on the day your loan is disbursed. So if your loan was disbursed yesterday, yesterday's the first day of your loan forgiveness period. If your loan was disbursed on May 1, then May 1 is the first day of your loan forgiveness period. And it's 8 weeks. So it's 56 days. Some of the promissory notes that some of you signed said 2 months. Some of them said 60 days. It's not. It's 8 weeks. It's 56 days. And your lender will, when they come around to giving you the forgiveness application, you will see that it is not 2 months or 60 days. It is 8 weeks. The employment and compensation levels need to be maintained during that covered period, or at least restored by June 30. And if you do maintain employment levels and compensation at least 75%, then or restore it by June 30th, then you get forgiveness for every dollar spent during that qualified period. And I'll go through what that means. Any unforgiven portion converts to a 2-year loan at 1% with a 6-month grace period, and the interest goes back and accrues from the date the loan was disbursed. So I know there have already been a lot of questions about what happens if I can't get my, you know, here I am, I've let people go, I've laid people off, I've had to reduce pay. What happens if I can't get up to the full forgiveness amount? The only penalty is you can either prepay it. It's a prepayable loan. So if you don't want to have a loan on your books for some reason, you can prepay it. And if otherwise, keep the loan. It's a really good thing. It's 1% money. You do have to repay it, but you get 2 years to repay with a 6-month grace period and 1% interest. You just can't beat that. That's really, really good money. So my advice is don't worry about it. You know, just start figuring out, you know, how you can repay the loan. And by the way, you can prepay that loan at any time. You know, you'll have a little bit of interest, but if you just want to just prepay it at any point, you can just prepay it and get rid of it. You got this for your lender. You know that it's already for nonprofits, and it's technically open until June 30. The program is, but it's first come, first serve. And the rules do continue to change and evolve, and we expect that for the forgiveness portion too. You know, this week we got the actual application. Even in the application, and the write-ups, it said further guidance will be coming on this topic. Further guidance will be coming on that topic. So we know that this is going to be a little bit of an evolutionary process because not all the questions are answerable right now. Today, the loan window does remain open. This is from yesterday or last night. You can see that there's over 100 billion left, 100 million. Yeah, 100 billion left. So there's plenty of money left. I don't think we'll get through it all by June 30. That's my current forecast. This is as of yesterday. So who sets up the forgiveness rules? Congress passed the CARES Act, which laid out the framework and appropriated the funds for this. Keep in mind, even as we go through today's presentation, if you're wondering, well, why this? Why did they set it up this way? Why did they set it up that way? Or, you know, would I be able to include this in the forgiveness period? Keep in mind that this is a substitute for paying unemployment from the government's perspective. So if you think about it from that lens, you will likely get an answer to your question. And we've seen that time after time. The Treasury has come out with answers to questions that support keeping employment up. And that's a big underlying principle of this program, and it can help guide you as you try to decide you know, what kinds of payments you can put in for your payroll, your qualified costs into the forgiveness period. The Treasury and the SBA are implementers and guarantors, and your lender has a responsibility for certifying, for making sure that you've done your the work properly. That's it. But they don't have to be sure it's correct. They just need to certify that you've done the work. Okay, and that's important. The SBA is going to hold you, the borrower, accountable, and if there's a problem with your loan application, they will not be going to the lender and saying, you didn't administer this properly. They will come to the borrower. It's already been announced that loans over $2 million are going to be 100% audited. I think that's part of the SBA's message to people that, you know, you need to follow the rules. And they're not going to, they couldn't possibly do all the loans below 2 million, but there could be spot checks. And you'll see in the certification, when we come to that section of the presentation, that there are all kinds of certifications relative to accuracy. What's your responsibility when it comes to the loan forgiveness? You are going to submit a forgiveness loan application. We'll come to that in just a minute. And you're going to also perform a whole bunch of verification steps. You're going to give your lender a whole bunch of substantiation on your payroll costs, documentation on your other covered expenses. You're going to certify that everything's true and correct, and there could be other documentation that your lender will require too. Your lender, all they have to do is just make a decision on whether your loan, the material, you know, on the material you have, is it complete? Is there anything egregious or not? You know, they just basically look at it and just process it. They're held harmless as long as they've got your documents and they've got your certifications. So again, they're just processing it. They're going to say, oh, you got an addition error, or this doesn't look right. They may come to you with questions like that, but fundamentally, again, the responsibility is yours. And then they can get rid of the loans. They hold them on their books for about 7 or 8 weeks, but they can sell the loans either to the SBA or to public institutions that want to buy them. Now, we're not going to go.
Hey, Caryn, let me ask you about that. I'm sorry, just real quick. If they sold the loans, would that mean you'd be dealing with somebody else to go through the forgiveness program?
Probably not for the forgiveness program. So the bank, although I guess it's possible, I think they can start selling the loans as soon as they want. But practically speaking, the SBA is paying the bank's fees to, you know, administer these loans. So I think practically speaking, the avenue until the loan is forgiven is going to be to sell them to the SBA. The SBA said after something like 7 weeks, the loans can be packaged and sold to them. If the bank holds it longer, they can either go to the SBA or to, you know, another lender. And yes, you could end up with someone else servicing your loan. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to go through these steps, but it is a really good idea to follow these 4 steps. And if you want to go to last week's webinar or the webinar from the week before on the Missionwell's website, it gives a lot of information on how to follow these 4 steps. The recommendation here is that you target your forgiveness amount by preparing a cash flow forecast through the end of 2020 at least. Now, I think as we all started going into the process, we thought, oh, we're going to maximize our forgiveness. I have seen cases with several of our business partners who have said, I don't think that's a good idea. I need money for the fall. I'm a school, or I work with schools, or I'm highly seasonal and I need to save some money for later. If you spend the money, if you get forgiveness, you have to have spent the money. So the idea for forgiveness is that you have spent all that money. And we'll get into that. There's no way to get forgiveness unless you spent the money. So once you spend the money, it's gone. So if you need the money for later, you got to balance that. You know, you got to balance the forgiveness versus having some money. And you don't need to request 100% forgiveness if you don't want to. Although I think most of you will do that. Now, the second step is to put together a budget for your covered period forgiveness amounts and monitor it. That's the best way to maximize your forgiveness because, you know, you've given some thought to what's going to go in, and you're, by looking at that, you're making sure that you've getting all the pieces, that everything's being paid on time. You know, there are some rules that say, like, for instance, if you're paying your rent and your rent payment for part of the period or your mortgage payment falls after the covered period, that's unlikely, but I guess it could happen, that you only have until the due date. A utility bill is probably a better example. So if you have a utility bill and it's due after the covered period, it's okay as long as it's paid on time. So if you have your budget pulled together, then you're going to remember, oh, okay, I have to get all these, don't even be 1 day late. Okay, you need to pay it in advance or, you know, pay it on time. So the budget's a really good idea because you're going to be budgeting to what you feel you want for the forgiveness, and you're going to be able to kind of really just control and be sure that you're on track. Substantiate your expenditures as you go. You're going to see there's a real focus on substantiation. Everything needs to be substantiated, and you know, talk to your lender. I'm going to show you the basic application process, but they may have something different or something more. Your lender will end up customizing the process to their own bank and their own bank compliance rules. And a lot of times you don't know until you've spoken with your lender how they'll do it. So Charlie, it's great that, you know, at least you know when your lender is going to tell you you're going to get your loan application. The loan forgiveness. What qualifies as forgivable? Let's go through this again. I remember I said we're going to talk kind of at a conceptual level first before we dig in to the applications. So let's be sure we get this, and then the application process itself won't be quite as confusing as it might otherwise be. So what qualifies as payroll costs? It's a 75% minimum. Now, you're going to see in the loan application a line in there that says divide this by 0.75, and it's a test of that 75% minimum. So, you know, if you're like, why am I dividing this by 0.75 later? To remember, you know, that it's a 75% minimum, has to be payroll costs, will help you not get confused when you're filling out the application. What's included in the 75%? Well, salary, MHA administers housing allowance, wages, tips, taxable allowances, vacation and sick pay, parental leaves, any other kind of leaves that are paid. So those are all the kind of the cash compensation items. Oh, severance will count in there. And then in addition to that, you can count things like your group health care plan costs, other benefit costs as well, retirement contributions, state and local taxes that are based on compensation that you're paying your employees or your staff. So all those things are payroll costs. Now, when we get to the loan application, I'll warn you right now that not all these things appear as lines. So there you go. We're going to need more guidance from your lender or from the SBA, maybe even a modification of the form, because you're going to see that not all these categories appear. So where do you put some of these costs if these really are eligible is a question.
Hey,
now,
Caryn?
Yeah.
You know, payroll costs is always, it just seems like it's the biggest question that people have. And they're saying, you know, our payroll doesn't line up. We've got, some has been earned, you know, we've got back pay that we might be paying people for, or maybe we want to, you know, it'd be really nice if it coincided with our pay periods when we were doing all this. However, it's not, and it also doesn't line up with your health insurance bills when they're due. How do you break that up?
Well, the good news is that there is now, if you have a biweekly or weekly payroll, there is a way to line up your covered period, your loan forgiveness period with your payrolls. So I'm going to come to that in just a minute if you want to hold on that.
Okay, I will. All right, cool. That's like the big thing that everybody keeps questioning about. So, okay, good. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right. If you don't qualify or you don't want to use, for whatever reason, the alternative covered period that matches your payroll, then your first and your last payrolls, chances are there's something you're going to need to do. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Your mortgage interest on real or personal property, if it's incurred before February 15, 2020. I've had some interesting questions on this, like what happens if my loan gets refinanced on the February 20th. And I think that is the same mortgage, it's just refinanced. But, you know, obviously you'll have less if it's refinanced. Presumably it's because the interest rate went down. You'll just have less interest cost in the forgiveness period.
And personal property would be like copy machines and things like that as?
Personal property has been identified as including machines, equipment, all kinds of things like that. So yeah, I think a copier machine, if you had, if you can break out, you know, through your lease or your rental agreement, the interest and the, you know, from there, and just get an amount for the copy machine that represents interest. If it's, you know, that kind of a purchase arrangement, then that would be okay. I track it. One of the pieces of guidance that we, you know, given out the last 2 weeks is in your budget for the forgiveness period, track everything. Because we still don't know, you know, even today we've got a better idea, but we still don't know. And if you think it's dubious, just highlight it in yellow on the spreadsheet and then come back to it. It's easier to remove than it is to add, and perhaps we'll get more clarification over the next few weeks that'll help in terms of understanding what is actually eligible. But for right now, we do know that it's on your mortgage interest. Your mortgage does count if it's a loan, an equipment loan, or a loan on some personal property. The lease had to have been in force as of February 15th, so a new lease would not qualify. Utilities, if the service began before February 15, 2020, then those utilities can qualify. That includes the distribution of electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, and internet access. Now, you may look at that and say, what about my sewer costs? You know, there may be septic tanks, you know, that need to be refilled, and, you know, other kinds of costs. And the answer there is that although it doesn't say it anywhere in all the documentation, you know, I have to believe that those are proper utility costs, and at the end of the day, those will be allowed. So put those in yellow in your spreadsheet for loan costs, and, you know, we'll see what happens over the next several weeks again. And any idle kind of the grant, the prepayment amount that you got is going to reduce your loan forgiveness. Now your lender the loan application will ask you if you got an idle loan and what that is. But in your calculations, you're not going to worry about that. The way that the loan application is set up, the SBA will just deduct anything that was paid to you for an idle loan, they'll just deduct that and you'll get a payment back, or the forgiveness. You already got the payment, but you'll get the forgiveness back less the amount of the idle loan. Okay, so there's nothing that the lender, there's no role that the lender is going to play for that idle loan. And if you recall that, if you got an idle loan, you actually went to the SBA to get that loan. You didn't go to your regular lenders. So the SBA is basically saying, we're going to handle that part, independent from the lenders. Okay, so now what's in the loan forgiveness package? Okay, so the loan forgiveness package, it's, let's see, it's about 13 or 14 pages, you know, front to back. And it has included in it a core form, a PPP loan forgiveness calculation form is the basic core of the document. And that's a summary. It's a summary of the forgiveness itself, and it comes to, at the bottom line, the amount of the forgiven loan. And then there's a Schedule A, and the Schedule A is computing the most critical component, these payroll-related costs, net of the reductions. Okay, so that's what Schedule A is doing. And then there's a worksheet for Schedule A, and that worksheet basically is going through the calculation of the full-time equivalent employees and the salary and wage reduction amounts. Okay, so when we're looking at this, keep in mind there's 3 core pieces, and then in addition, once in a while, you know, each of these 3 core pieces has a whole bunch of instructions. And sometimes in the instructions, there's a little kind of a worksheet in the instructions for how to do something. So it's a lot of pieces in this application. And as we go through it, you're going to see, and I think it's pretty confusing, the Schedule A and Schedule A worksheet, but I've got at the title, you know, I've either got the loan forgiveness form or Schedule A worksheet for each of these forms. And if it doesn't say that, it means it's pulled from the actual instructions themselves. At the 4th piece is a borrower demographic form. It's voluntary. I'll cover that right now because it is voluntary and it's not very hard, but for a nonprofit, it looks like they're asking for information on who your directors and officers are. And they're asking for ethnic and other demographic information. Again, that's voluntary. You can either do that or not do that. Okay, so we're ready to go. Some of this, here we go. So let's talk first about calculating the payroll costs and the non-payroll costs. I've tried to summarize here things that are different or clarified. So essentially, there's no change in definitions in terms of what counts from a loan application, from the loan application perspective for the payroll costs. In other words, if you go back to your loan application, you remember you calculated an average month based on 2019 and you multiply that by 2.5. Okay, so there was a whole bunch of calculations in there or items in there that counted for those payroll costs, and those are unchanged. Now, some of you might be saying to yourself, well, at the time my lender told me I could not include minister's housing allowance. Or I was told I could not include a cell allowance. And some of these things are clearer now in terms of if they're allowed or not, or where they're allowed. So if that is the case for you, then there's nothing that's holding you back from putting those qualified costs into your forgiveness calculation. So let's take minister's housing allowance. It's probably the most common thing that some of your loan applications were reduced for. Now, when you're calculating forgiveness, the good news is, from the gross calculation perspective, is that if your loan did not include those, you're easily going to get to the 75% of the forgiveness potentially, because now you are going to be able to include the minister's housing allowance in the forgiveness. Okay, that's been clarified, that the minister's housing allowance is a valid payroll cost. I want to mention right now, because a lot of questions have come to me about this as well. Some people have said, I want to pay a hardship cost. I want to pay a pandemic crisis payroll cost. I want to pay my people full-time so I get full forgiveness even though I have no work for them to do. So let me go through a couple of those situations just really quickly here. The one where you pay the people full-time for doing no work, that's up to you. It'd be nice if you could find them something to do. But I mean, again, keep in mind the government wants this as a substitute for unemployment. And so either you're paying them or the government is paying them for unemployment. So they view that with some indifference, is the feeling there. But for some of those other costs, a hardship cost, if somebody really truly is experiencing a hardship during the pandemic and they need a premium, great. But if they don't, and you're just trying to qualify additional costs for forgiveness, don't do that. That's where I think you're going to get into trouble with the certifications and the verifications. You really want to just put things that are reasonable. People have asked about, can I accelerate my annual raises from December into my loan forgiveness period? No, because those are annual raises. So that wouldn't be a good thing to move into this period. You could be asked, why did you raise people's pay? But if your regular pay increases fall during the loan forgiveness period, well, that's probably okay because it's a scheduled raise. So you've got to think about from the perspective of the government, what they're trying to do with this program, and chances are your lender and the SBA will, be sticking with those for making decisions on, what's reasonable, and that's the lens you should use for what's reasonable too. The covered period, we already knew it was eight weeks from the loan disbursement date, but that again has come out and absolutely firm. But here's the interesting part, Charlie, this gets to your question. What about matching my covered period to my payroll so that everything's easier and I don't have to calculate as much? Well, I think the government agreed. So they've come out with an alternative covered period. So let's just say your covered period started on May 1. And your payroll begins on May 5. It's a biweekly payroll. You can move your first day of your covered period to May 5. So that then simplifies your calculations. It'll march right along with your payroll. And you're allowed to do that if you pay people biweekly or more frequently. But so typically that would be biweekly or weekly. Most people don't pay daily. But if you're at least biweekly, then you can elect this covered period. It does shift for everything to everything that's in the loan application that says covered period or alternative covered period. You must, if you elect it once in one place, you need to keep the alternative covered period consistent throughout. Okay, so it's like a single decision. You're either going to use the alternative covered period or you're going to use the covered period. In every place in the application where it says that you can use either one, you need to be consistent.
What if let me ask you something. And just to be clear, Caryn, you said that was my question. That wasn't my question. That's everybody's question. So
Yep.
I don't want to take the hit for that one. But here's one ministry that they received it one day and then they received an additional amount later on.
First disbursement.
Yeah. Okay. And then they had the second one a couple of weeks later.
First disbursement.
So first disbursement. Okay, you answered it. Okay, I got it. Let me ask you a couple more just as we're kind of zipping through these, if you could. Okay. Does it cover the associated payroll taxes for each payroll? Thank you.
It covers the payroll taxes that are not employee paid and that are not federal.
Okay. Medicare?
The employer portion.
Okay. So the employer portion of Medicare. All right. There were some questions on the part. What doesn't it cover for? It's the federal taxes, right?
Yeah, the federal taxes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. There were quite a few right here. Associated payroll taxes. We answered that one. Let me just see. So the covered period It is when the payroll expense was incurred or when it is paid. That's the
So
question.
let's cover that right now. We'll go through this. So let me go back and just on the covered period. It is in general, it's the 8-week period from the loan disbursement date. So it's unrelated to the date that payroll was incurred or paid. But if you have biweekly or weekly, then you can change your covered period to match the first day of your payroll. Okay, so that will be the first day of your covered period, then is the first day of your payroll. But let's talk now for a minute about this incurred and paid. So the new rules say that you're eligible for forgiveness if a payroll cost is incurred and paid. So what does that mean? If it's incurred, it means it's earned. So when you're thinking about the 8-week period of forgiveness, chances are for most of us who have like semi-monthly or monthly payrolls, there's no way that your payroll is going to line up with the incurred. Your payroll period, you may be halfway through your payroll period by the time you get your first disbursement on your loan. So what's going to happen for that first payroll period to get to incurred is you're going to be allocating. You're going to take that first payroll and you're going to allocate that between payroll that applies before the forgiveness period and payroll that applies within the payroll period or the covered period. Now, that's going to happen again at the end of your 8-week forgiveness period. You'll have a payroll, and the payroll's, unless you're really lucky, it's probably not going to coincide exactly with the end of the 8-week forgiveness period. So what that means is that you're going to be doing, again, an allocation of the final payroll between the amounts that fall into the forgiveness period or the covered period and the amounts that fall after the covered period. So that's the incurred part. Now, the paid part is not going to be a problem for the early payrolls during the 8 weeks, but it will be a problem. And recall, we talked about this at the last webinar. What about that last payroll? Do we need to get a special payroll on the last day and catch everything up? And the IRS has said, nope, no need. As long as you hold the payroll, you actually pay the people after the payroll period in the regular payroll schedule, then any amounts from that, even though it falls after the forgiveness period, are forgiven in the period. So that goes back to the definition of incurred. So for the most part, you're going to use the incurred, but the paid part is important because as long as you pay according to a regular schedule for these payroll costs, you're going to be fine. Okay,
is there a worksheet that can help you kind of figure this out?
Yeah, we're going to the worksheet we put together in prior weeks, we will update over this weekend, and on Tuesday will be up on our website, and it's going to show you how to do the allocation of the first and the last payrolls. It already does that, but there's a few other things that need to get adjusted for new guidance that is continuing to come out from the SBA. But we'll have that up on the website on Tuesday. So you can go, say, Tuesday afternoon, and we'll have a very thorough worksheet that's going to have everything that you need. It'll be easy to transfer, to copy and paste pieces to your lender, to be able to it'll have the forecasting piece in there, for the loan forgiveness period. It'll have the calculation of the forgiveness, all in a way that's a lot more understandable than this application. When you see this application, you're going to say, oh my goodness, this looks confusing. Okay. So the spreadsheet's really nice because it's all done in a spreadsheet. You can see and visualize it a lot better, and then just transfer information.
We'll send that out as well. Or maybe, okay. Caryn, I'll just give you the people that attend and you can send it out to them directly and we'll get that figured out.
Absolutely, we'll do that. Okay. We'll send it out Tuesday.
Awesome.
Okay, so now the paid part then, for the non-payroll costs, let's talk about those. So sometimes you have utility bills for things like health insurance. Usually that's prepaid. You pay that in advance of the month for your health insurance costs. So for that, it's not an issue typically, although there's certain kinds of like retirement plans where you make, the employer makes contributions to an IRA or some other 403B plan, or some other plan that they're making contributions after the fact, right? Because the contributions depend on payroll. So those kind of payments that are made after the fact could also end up outside of the 8-week forgiveness plan. And what the government is saying for all of those costs, whether they're payroll related or non-payroll related, as long as you pay them on time, okay, then it's going to count and be qualified. So if you have a utility bill that's after the fact and it comes in for the covered period, you're going to again go through an allocation process and allocate what belongs in the covered period, what doesn't belong in the covered period. But as long as you pay that bill on time, you're covered. Okay, that's going to be what counts, is just getting it paid on time. So don't pay anything late. That's the bottom line, or you could disqualify yourself. Okay, so again, just in summary, things that happen at the beginning and things that happen at the end of your forgiveness period are going to require some kind of allocation, and things that happen at the end of the forgiveness period, you will have till the usual time to get it paid, whether that's payroll, after the fact benefits, utilities, after the fact paid. You'll have till the usual time to get those paid. Okay, now here we are. This is the easy page. This is the top half, or the top 60% of the one-page form, the PPP loan forgiveness calculation form. So I've got the actual form up here. And it's just got all the usual information at the top. You need to put in, the legal name of the borrower, your DBA. You put all that in your original loan application. So just pull that up if you need those things, and fill it out that way. You got an SBA PPP loan number from your lender. You're going to fill that in here, and you're going to put in the lender. If the lender gave you a separate number, which I'm sure they did, then you're going to put that number here. Okay, you're going to put the loan amount and the disbursement date here. The disbursement date for many of us will be day one of the covered period. You're going to put the employees at the time of the loan application, and don't bother going back and calculating that. You've already reported that too on your loan application. So you could just go pull that from your original loan application, and then you're going to calculate how many employees you had at the time of forgiveness. This is not an FTE calculation. These are just remember that confusion, right? Between the number of employees and the FTEs. This is not an FTE. Just count up the number of employees and fill this out here. And then you're going to put in the amount of your EIDL, your economic injury disaster loan amount, if you got one. And I know a lot of you got loans of at least several thousand, although ranging up to 10, and some of you who were in early even may have gotten 15,000 for your advance. So whatever that amount is that you got for that advance amount is what you're going to put in here. Now, if you got more money for your EIDL, you're not going to put that in. That portion of the EIDL loan is just a straightforward EIDL loan, but the amount that the government gave you as an advance, you're going to put here, and you're also going to put your EIDL application number for that loan in here too. And again, this is the last time you'll see it on this application, but when you get the notification from your lender of what's forgiven, the SBA then will tell the lender how much to deduct. They'll verify that in terms of how much to deduct from your forgiveness. You're then going to say what your payroll schedule is, and you know why, because then you'll know if you're eligible for the alternative covered period. And then if you do want to elect that alternative payroll covered period, you're going to put the first day of your first payroll, and you're going to go through to the last day of the last payroll. So if you're biweekly, you put the first day of the first biweekly, you'll go 4 payrolls out and put the last day of that payroll there too. And if you've got a loan more than $2 million, you're going to check the box there. Okay, so that's all pretty easy. Before we get into the bottom part of the first page, I want to just conceptually walk you through, though. This is what how the forgiveness works. Now, as you recall from maybe prior webinars, or maybe you just recall this from the PPP loan process itself, there's three things that happen when you're looking at the loan forgiveness. Number one, there's going to be a check to see if salaries and wages dropped more than 25%. If they dropped more than 25%, if you did an across-the-board pay cut of, let's just say 30%, then that 5% difference between the 25 and 30 is going to be a reduction from your loan forgiveness. The first 25 doesn't count, but anything over the 25% is going to be, it's going to get calculated employee by employee, and therefore, and then you'll add those up, employee by employee, and that comes off the top of your reduction. So you're going to do a calculation of how much is the reduction, and then you're going to reduce it by this limitation on forgiveness, anything above the 25%. Now, there's a couple of tricks in here. It excludes, that calculation excludes highly paid employees. So let's just say you have employees who earn over $100,000 per year. And I'm going to just tell you in concept first, and then we'll go back to some of the nits. If they were paid in 2019 over $100,000 in any payroll, then they're going to be excluded from this calculation. In other words, you could have reduced their pay by 50%, and in this loan application, that will not count against you. Okay, so the salary and wage reduction is looking only at reductions of people who earn less than $100,000. Now, okay, do you think that seemed clear, Charlie? Did you have a question?
It does, but what's coming up a lot is a lot of ministries have 2 payroll schedules, and that's popping up quite a bit. That maybe they do one for the church and one for the school or the preschool or something like that. How do you reconcile that?
Well, if the payroll, I'm assuming the question is coming because the payrolls are different, like maybe one is monthly for the church and it's biweekly or weekly, for the preschool because they have overtime, and so they've chosen weekly or biweekly. So that's a great question, and there's no guidance on it, but my guess is that they're not going to be able to pick the alternate covered period because they have people who are not paid biweekly or more frequently. So my guidance would be on that to go with the normal covered period, which is the 8 weeks that start from the date that the loan is disbursed. Okay, and then the calculation, you're going to be making 2 calculations. You'll have calculations for the employees who are, in the little example that we were just talking about, monthly. Some of those you'll need to do an allocation of the first payroll and an allocation of the last payroll. And then let's just say the preschool that is affiliated with the church is paid biweekly. You're going to have the allocations you're going to need to do on the biweekly for what falls in the period, what was incurred or falls in the period, and what doesn't. And the same thing at the end, what falls in the period and what doesn't. So you're going to actually double the allocations to do, once for the monthly and once for the biweekly.
And let me ask you on this one where it says the highly paid employees earned over $100,000 in wage rate during any single payroll period. Do you mean that if somebody made more during a certain season, maybe a certain month, but they came back down, then they would be excluded? Yep. But let's say they made $101,000 last year, and then this year they're down to $60,000, then they would be excluded?
That's correct.
Okay.
So this little table here has the amount, if you're just checking to see, if you have somebody who needs to be excluded from this calculation, this little table right here shows you if you do monthly payrolls, it's $8,333. If it's weekly, it's $1,923.
I got you. Okay.
You just go back and look at each of your payrolls and see if anybody exceeded these based on the type of payroll you have. And then those people you're going to knock out of this particular calculation. Okay. Now, other calculations are going to stay in. But for this particular calculation, they're going to be, they're not going to participate in that. Okay, and don't forget, you're going to exclude any employees residing outside of the United States. And for this particular calculation, it's going to be compared to, there's so many different base payroll periods, okay? So it's very confusing, but for this particular one, it's going to be compared to the first quarter of 2020. Okay, so that's kind of been set that way. Now, I suppose a lender could say, well, that, you know, February 15 is before the end of that first quarter, and maybe change that to the fourth quarter of 2019. But it looks like in the suggested loan application that they're using the first quarter of 2020.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that's test one, salary and wages. Now this is test two, and this is looking then at the, you've got the, keep in mind, you've got all the expenses that qualify for forgiveness. You've reduced it now in the prior slide for the amounts of that you reduce salaries beyond 25%. So if you drop salaries beyond 25%, that amount beyond 25%, employee by employee, got added up, and it reduced it. So, you know, if your loan was 100,000 and, you know, you've got, you're now looking at your wages, and let's just say, you know, on a gross basis, there's 70,000. And then you have 10,000 people who, that's unlikely. Let's just say you have, you know, 1,000 of costs for an employee who happens to make over 100,000. You're going to reduce the 70 down to 69. And now the 69 is now the new base. It's the base from which you're going to calculate this next limit. So it's the qualified cost minus that excess wage cut. All right, is going to be what you're going to apply this ratio to. Now, this is basically, just like we looked at in the last slide, the drop in wages, this is a drop in the number of people that you hired or the hours that people are working. And so they're using this concept of full-time equivalence. A full-time equivalent, if you work half-time, you're a 0.5, you're a half of a full-time equivalent. If you work 3/4 time, you're 0.75 or 3/4 of a full-time equivalent. So you just, you know, basically calculate, you're calculating, you know, what percentage of full-time people are. One of the questions that's come up in the prior seminars or webinars is, what is full-time? How many hours per week is that? I've noticed in the, there's a safe harbor calculation of full-time equivalents. They're saying in that calculation, they're using 40 hours a week. I'm just pointing that out. I think there's going to be questions on, you know, what do we use? If full-time at my church means 35 hours, is that full-time? Do I need to, you know, how do I handle that?
Sure.
So just going through the basics here, a drop in full-time equivalents reduces the forgiveness proportionately. The FTE reduction ratio then is going to be the average FTEs per month during the covered period divided by the base period average full-time equivalents. Okay, so
and the base period was?
The base period we're going to come to right here. Thank you.
Yeah, I see it. I see it.
Yeah. The base period options are going to be February 15 to June 30, 2019. You can elect that one. Or if you prefer, and if it's better for you, you can elect January 1 to February 29, 2020. So those are your two base periods that you can use as an option. Now, if you're seasonal, you have a third option, which is any 12-week consecutive period between May 1 and September 15 of 2019. So you pick the 12-week period, and you can pick the one that works best for you. So if you're seasonal, you've got 3 choices.
I think that helps with a lot of the preschools and schools and summer camps and things like that. At least you've got some options. But I think it helps, but it's a challenge, isn't it? You got to kind of figure all of this out.
Yeah, you do have to figure it out.
I don't have much to add there. I'm trying to figure it out in my head as we go along here, Caryn. I've been spending time on this, but you're the pro. Okay.
Yeah, but when you get the spreadsheet that, you know, from from us, if you use our spreadsheet, what you're going to see is that there's 3 different periods, and you can fill out all 3, and then you can determine then, you know, what works the best. You kind of have to eyeball your data for if you're seasonal, and pick the 12-week period there. But you know, basically, you want to use the one that gives you the lowest number of full-time equivalents, because the one that's the lowest, then, you know, those periods will maximize your forgiveness. Now, if you happen to have been a rock steady employer and nothing's changed for any of these periods, then it doesn't matter, right? If you're a ministry, a small ministry, and you've had 4 employees and you've had them for the last 5 years, and it's the same 4 employees going forward, and you kept the same 4 employees, then it's not going to matter. None of this does. You know, you're fine. You're gonna this ratio is going to work out to be a 1, so you're going to get 100%. But for those of us who have more complex situations, who's, you know, if it's staffing changes, some people moving from full-time to part-time, you're going to need to go through this calculation. And the more you care about maximizing your loan forgiveness, the more of these base periods you're going to have to look at.
Okay.
So the average,
you know what I've seen a lot of ministries ask about, and I just want to caution them, is that people are saying, you know, we've got a bunch of people that have been 1099s, and we're going to bring them back during this period and then convert them back to 1099s again later on. And I just want to caution you, I would say that could be considered fraud. We don't want to do something like that. You don't want to bring people on that were 1099 specifically. If you've got to find other people to bring on, great, bring other people on. You know, it's the FTEs, but it's that 1099 to W-2 back to 1099 is the thing that really would concern me.
That would concern me too. It would not concern me as much, though, if the 1099, let's just say there was a 1099 worker and it was a musician, and that person was categorized improperly, right, as a 1099 worker.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
in that case, if you're going to just pull the person in as a wage earner, as long as they then are not needing to stay 1099 because they're eligible to go out for a PPP loan themselves, right? By you doing that, you're removing, you can't have fraud that way where they're going through and calculate and saying, I'm not employed. I was 1099 and that fell to 0, but now I have a W-2.
It's that back and forth is the thing that is sketchy to me. It's if you go, hey, we're 1099 to W-2 for a period of time, then we're going to put you back to 1099. We don't want to do that. That
would be sketchy and illegal if you're in California, probably. But the thing also is sketchy. The other sketchy thing would be if you know, you've talked this through with your 1099. If you brought them on, I mean, technically they're making wages now during the forgiveness period. But if they're also claiming loan forgiveness themselves because they're eligible for loan forgiveness, and it may be best to just, you know, I can't give legal advice here, but you need to work it through with them. And maybe it's better if you guys talk it through and you bring them on and fix the legal issues for your church or your ministry after the forgiveness period. I do think it's important, and I'll just put in that commercial, you know, with AB 5 having passed in California, we need to classify our workers correctly, okay? And that's something, again, that Missionwell can help you with, our HR staff can help you with. But churches do, in my experience, do misclassify, and that is increasingly a risk. And, you know, your church might get, as a result of these loans, might get more scrutiny by the government. So I would recommend that as soon as that loan forgiveness is over, that you address any of those issues in terms of, you know, AB 5 and contractor versus employee classification. But I just don't see how you can get that done well during the PPP period due to all the issues with their PPP loans, your contractors' PPP loans. They're eligible to go out themselves. True. So maybe fix it right after. Okay. So we've talked about the average FTEs per month, and the offers to rehire at the same hours and rate won't count against you if the employee turns you down. And by the way, there's several other qualifications now. And what I'll try to do is things that are going to be forgiven or where your forgiveness will get extended. And I'm going to make a note to add that in here. I won't cover it right now because we don't have time. But there's other situations where you might get forgiveness even though there's no employee or nobody in place. So let me go ahead and I'll add that into the slide, Charlie, for when we when people go pull up the slides for later.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the third conceptual piece is that limits on forgiveness can get ignored if the reductions that you made from February 15, which is the base date, to April 26, 2020, and by the way, that date is 30 days after the implementation of the CARES Act, are restored by June 30. And that can happen for the FT wages and the salary and wages, and then those limitations don't apply. Okay, so it's kind of like a get out of jail card. Even if you did have reductions of salary, and even if you did cut back your employees, as long as it's fixed by June 30, then you're good. Now that's why I mentioned earlier to you, Charlie, that even if your lender sent you that package on June 24, you probably didn't have time, because for any ministry that did make cuts in either wages or in people, you know, they're still a week away anyway from making a determination of what their forgiveness would be. So for some of you, June 30th will be the first possible date that your loan forgiveness application can be completed, or, you know, after June 30, because you're gonna want to wait, because you know you're going to be hiring back people. Okay. Now this is the forgiveness amount calculation, and it's at the bottom of the first page. It is the actual loan forgiveness application. All right, what you saw at the top was just this basic information about the borrower, and now this then below there is like the second half, or the bottom of the first page of that calculation. And what you see here is that it's actually coming through at the bottom line right here and calculating what your forgiveness is. Now, let's start at that bottom line. It's basically your bottom line forgiveness will be a function of, it's going to be one of three things here. So you're going to essentially be putting different tests in here. And then once you've got those tests down here, then you're going to test, and you're going to take the smallest amount. So you're going to essentially here, you're going to be taking, let's start at the top for a minute. You've got your payroll and your non-payroll costs. We've already talked about, you know, what those are. So I'll show you a little bit more about this, you know, how you can how you'll fill it out on the application. But we've talked about what this is conceptually already. So you've got your payroll costs that are going to go here. Then you've got the three other categories: your mortgage interest, your business rent or lease payments, and your utility payments. Those are going to go to this here. So you've got lines 1 through 4 then. And then once you have filled those out, then you're going to put the amount of the salary and hourly wage reduction. So for instance, remember we talked about if you reduce salaries or wages more than 25%, you're going to be calculating person by person how much that is. This is where you're going to put that amount of how much that reduction is. And then you're going to subtract that amount from those, you know, this is your gross qualified costs up here. This is the amount of the salary and wage reductions that you did that were in excess of what's allowed. And so this then is going to be the amount of forgiveness that you're actually looking at. And then you're going to calculate that ratio that we talked about just a minute ago, the FTE ratio. Like, let's just say your staff fell by 40%. Okay, so your FTE ratio that's going to be in here is going to turn out to be 60%. So you're going to then take 60% of line 6, what's left, and that then is going to become your forgivable amount. Okay, so the forgivable amount is going to go here. The actual amount of your PPP loan is the next line. So, you know, if it turns out that your forgiveness amount, and this is going to happen for some of you because you're going to have minister's housing allowance in your forgiveness, right? And if you have a lot of that, and that kind of overwhelms the fact that, you know, you used 2.5 months, and this is only 8 weeks, if that minister's housing allowance or other costs that got knocked off of your loan that you now realize are forgivable, there are going to be some of you that are going to come up with an amount for forgiveness, and then the amount of your loan is going to be less than that. So you're always going to be capped at the amount of your loan. And then you're going to have to take these payroll costs and divide that. Remember, I told you before about the 0.75%. 75% of the loan costs need to be related to payroll. So you're going to go back up to line 1, and you're going to gross that up and make sure that at least 75% of the costs of forgiveness are related to payroll costs. Then you're going to take the lowest of all 3 of those, and that's going to be the forgiveness amount. So, I mean, I wish you could stop there and say that's that, but this is the end of the first page. But now I want to show you some of the other things that go with the application. Okay, but at the conceptual level, you've got it. You saw the concept. Now you've seen how it falls into here. Now let me just show you a few more details. So the application then continues with representations that you have to make. And so you are going to have to pick probably the person who signed the promissory note and who signed the loan application in the first place is going to be signing off on these. And just saying that you've used the loan to pay off eligible costs, and that you've made all the right reductions and made sure it didn't exceed 70, that 25% of the costs were, no more than 25% of the costs were for non-payroll related. And it was only 8 weeks worth of compensation if it was under a special circumstance. Ignore this last bullet because it's really for like an LLC or a partnership or some other kind of a circumstance. Typically, this one is not going to apply for a nonprofit. Okay, so now those are the things that the government's asking you to certify, and then everything else that I'm about to show you, really, it's all about saying, have you been accurate? Have you been truthful? Did you provide me verification? And if you didn't, then here's some penalties. Okay, so that's what this whole next page is. I won't go through it in detail. Just take my word for it. That's all this says is, the government wants to know that everything is accurate. I have put a red box around one of these, which is on the required documentation. We talked about before that there's going to be required documentation later in the presentation. I'll show you a little bit more about that, but you are going to be documenting everything in that forgiveness, the loan forgiveness application, everything. Okay, down to the penny. Okay. Now, remember we talked about the fact that there's a couple of additional pieces beyond the actual summary loan forgiveness application. This is the second piece that we talked about in that slide. This is the Schedule A here worksheet. And that worksheet is going to do a couple of different things. I'm sorry. It's going to go to, this is the Schedule A, and it's going to go to the Schedule A worksheet and pull certain information from that. And it's all of this now for this particular page is going to really relate to your payroll costs and make sure that you're reporting in that summary loan application the correct amount. So everything now here, from here on out, is all just assistance for you and making sure that you're being accurate in what you put in that loan forgiveness. And I want to point out here for this Schedule A here, there's a box 1, a box 2, a box 3, a box 4, and a box 5. Those come from the Schedule A worksheet. So in a sense, this is summarizing up the Schedule A worksheet. And I'm going to show you that in just a minute too. The Schedule A worksheet is really just calculating all the payroll costs that are then going to move up to here. And the difference between Schedule A and the Schedule A worksheets is the worksheets are employee by employee by employee. And so what you're doing is you're moving up the totals for all the employees into this particular page. So we're going to go look at those 5 boxes in just a minute. And we'll look at what that's going to do for this. And then at the bottom here, once we get to these, all of these done, it's going to, not only are you going to have pulled up the compensation for all of your employees, but then you're going to look at the non-cash components. Remember I told you earlier that there's not a line for all kinds of benefits. These are the only lines that are showing here. Line 6, 7, and 8 is in health insurance, retirement plans, and employer, state, and local taxes assessed on employee compensation. So vision, dental, HSAs, none of those have a line.
But a lot of people are asking about, you know, a number of things in there, like workers' compensation. They're saying, should we be including this? It's one of those things that I think it's one of those yellow items that we've talked about to build that cushion a little bit. And, you know, I know earlier we talked about FICA and Social Security, and, you know, the federal taxes aren't included, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and that would be, okay, I think I asked the question a little bit incorrectly when I was first talking about it. And this is not my strength. That's why we have Caryn in here. So sometimes my questions that I'm asking aren't the best. But it's going to be state and local taxes assessed on the employee. Yeah, but it's the employer portion, correct?
It's the employer portion of state and local, yes.
Okay.
Thanks for clarifying that,
All
Joe. Okay. So this may change, or your lender may instruct you and say, put those kind of costs in health insurance. The vision and dental maybe are forms of health insurance. We don't know. That's all just still open. This one you can ignore, this compensation to owners, unless you have a very unusual situation. You can just ignore this particular box here. And then this is going to come to total payroll costs. And then the total payroll costs is going to move up to the big loan application. So this number 1 and this number 2 are both numbers that are going to move up to the big loan application. Number 2, item 2, which I'll show you in a minute how that's calculated. It's the same as what I said, but I'll show you the worksheet now that you're going to use to do it. Item 2 is going to be looking at the wage reduction, the wage and salary reduction amount, okay? And then item 3 here from the loan application that we looked at before is going to be pulling amounts from 2 different boxes, adding up 2 different boxes to get to the FTEs. So let me show you, maybe a little clearer if I show you the actual worksheet in just a minute. I just want to finish Schedule A before we go there though. This is going to be looking at, this is going to be your part of the FTE reduction calculation here. And you can skip this if you haven't reduced your employees or the paid hours of your employees between January 1 and the end of the covered period, okay? So you can skip it and just put in a 1 on line 13. But otherwise, you're gonna need to go through and do these calculations. So remember we talked about the different base periods a couple slides back. You know, you can either use, you know, from February 15 of 2019 to June 30, you can use January 1 and February till end of February of 2020, or if you're seasonal, you can pick any 12 months between, you know, May and September 15. So you're going to put here, you're going to put the, whichever reference period you've chosen, you're going to have the FTEs shown here on line 11. And then you're going to go back and add up from that prior slide, lines 2 and 5, the FTEs from here and here from that prior slide, right? So, and again, they break it out. You'll see the reason why in just a minute, but they break it up between employees who earn less, 100,000 or less, and employees who earn more than 100,000. And then you have to kind of add them back up. But you're going to take the sum of those two, and that's going to go here, and then you're going to calculate your ratio, the reduction ratio. Okay, so by the time you get done with Schedule A, you have basically finished calculating all your payroll costs. You've got a summary of the reduction for the wage and salary component, and you also have the ratio for the FTE reduction. All right, so now to see how we do that in more detail, we're going to go and look at the actual Schedule A worksheet. Now, the schedule, and the reason I put these numbers on here is just to code everything back right up to the top. So hopefully that will help you kind of see what goes where, and help you navigate through this presentation here. But basically, the worksheet itself is, and the spreadsheet that Missionwell has will break it out this way too. It'll be done the same way. But you're doing this employee by employee. You're making sure that you list initially in the top part of the table, this part here, this is going to be for employees who earn less than 100,000 in any one pay period in 2019. This bottom one is for all employees who earn more than 100,000. So you're going to have, split your list in two, less than 100,000, more than 100,000. Now you already know why you're doing the less than 100,000. If you paid them, if they had a reduction that was more than a 25% of their salary or their wage, their hourly wage, then you're going to be calculating an amount that you need to reduce the loan by. And I'm going to come to this in just a minute and show you how you do that on a person-by-person basis. But otherwise, these two are identical. You can see that the bigger piece of this, box 1 and box 2, is the same as box 4 and box 5. Okay, it's just the cash compensation and the average FTEs. Okay, so don't get too confused. This all looks like it's hard, but really it's just a list of employees. You're going to sort it between those who make more, anyone who made more than 100,000 in any one pay period. Remember, I had the little table in there that showed you what you look at. So anyone who made more than 100,000 in any pay period, is gonna fall to the bottom here, and you don't need to worry about the salary and hourly wage reductions for them. Okay, you're just going to calculate the salary and wage reductions for the employees who made less than 100,000, and then again, that's going to move up to the forms until it's deducted off of your forgiveness. Okay, so that's this.
Hey, Caryn.
Yeah.
Where I'm kind of confused is like, what about, I want to call them all the whatabouts. It's like, what about the person that's on maternity leave? Or what about the person that is a substitute teacher that we didn't include? Or what about the people that said, gee, we don't want to come back and we don't want to work right now? How do we document all of that?
Through bona fide offers.
Okay.
You need to.
Is there a spot on the application that they should be discussing that?
There's no spot in this application. That's a separate piece of documentation that they need to keep that will not be going to their lender. Okay, but you must keep that. You must keep that documentation on hand internally. And so if the SBA comes back and asks you, it's like, wow, look, you have fewer employees than your forgiveness would imply. Then you need to say, look, here's my bona fide offer. Here's what happened with this person died. So all the different situations where you might be allowed forgiveness. You need to document those, each one of those. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, for the purposes of that chart that I just showed you, there's a simplified FTE calculation that is allowed. You can use one full-time employee for anyone who makes who worked 40 or more hours in that pay period. Or if they made less than 40, you can use 0.5. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, heck, that's not so good. My people work 0.75. Well, it doesn't matter. You're going to apply this test to both the base period. You're going to use this definition for both your base period. You're going to go back and redo your base period FTEs and calculate it using this methodology. And then you're going to calculate this during your covered period. So if you have the same people with the same 0.5s and the same ones, chances are, and if you're stable, you're going to get about the same. You're going to get about the same number. So if things are unstable, you may want to calculate it both ways, doing an actual FTE calculation and then doing the simplified way and see which works better for you. It's a choice. Okay, so this particular piece here is not in the loan application. It is not in Schedule A, and it is not in the Schedule A worksheet. It's in the instructions. And this is just basically telling you how to go through and calculate the person by person salary and hourly wage reductions. So, essentially what this is step by step just saying, look, either take the salary or the wage and calculate it base period and calculate the current for the current forgiveness period. And then for, whatever the difference is, then you're gonna just incorporate that into that schedule up above. Okay, you're going to calculate the amount, the physical dollar amount, and move that to the schedule above. Now, if it's a wage, then you're going to need to apply hours to those calculations, and that's what the part in red is doing. It's calculating an hourly wage to earnings. So this is just more detailed guidance in how to calculate. Let me go back here and show you. This is going to roll up to this piece here, okay, for the salary and wage reductions. So that's just guidance on how to do it. And again, that's in the instructions. It's not in the Schedule A or the Schedule A worksheet.
Hey, so Caryn, and I know we're going a little bit long, but go back to the two back. It's okay. We got one more. That one right there. So a lot of ministries, it's, oh, no, you were there. That's it. A lot of ministries have their people working 37 and a half weeks, or what about, 37 and a half hours a week or 35 hours, and that's considered full-time. Is it locked in? It's 40 hours is one, and if you've got somebody that, okay, so they're all going to be, a lot of people are going to be considered a 0.5.
If you use this simplified calculation, yeah.
I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I know we'll keep going through it in different scenarios.
The text actually just says 40 hours or more, one, right? Under 40 hours, 0.5. Okay. It's pretty simple there. But again, this is, it's your choice. So if you don't like it, don't use it.
Correct. Okay.
Okay, and then again, this was the detail for how you're going to calculate person by person. This is for salary and wages, but then this is a conversion of the wages to the hours here. And then here's finally is on the PPP Schedule A worksheet is a safe harbor. Now, this is, again, that test conceptually to say, look, if I met these criteria for when I reduced my people, but then I either wages or hours, but then by June 30 of 2020, I moved everybody back. That's this test here that we talked about before. So here you're basically looking at the base period here. They're saying, look, you get from February 15 to April 26. And again, remember, that's the period 30 days after passing the CARE Act. So Feb 15 is kind of the initial coronavirus period to 30 days after the CARES Act was passed. And so if in that time, you're calculating your average FTEs, and for the purpose of this safe harbor calculation and no other calculations, for the purpose of this calculation only, you're gonna, essentially anything that you, let's just say you reduce further from this period, and then by June 30, if you're back up to that FTE level that is shown there, then you don't have to reduce the, your FTEs. Okay, so this is great. For those of you who do plan to get your employment fully back up by June 30, this is just the calculation of how you're going to do that. Okay, a couple of other things here that I want to go through. First of all, these are the documents that your lender is going to require. The documentation verifying the eligible cash compensation and non-cash benefit payments from the covered period. You're going to have to provide this list of things. So, either bank account statements, payroll reports, various tax forms would count. And for your bills that you pay for insurance, for utilities, for mortgage, any document that confirms what those are. So full documentation of that. And then for the FTEs, again, payroll reports would work. The number of FTEs showing up, if it shows up on you can get a report from this probably from your payroll provider, and that's what I would recommend. But you've got these 3 periods, and we've talked about these before, that you're going to be looking at your documentation either between Feb 15 and June 30 of 2019, or you're going to look for the period between January 1 and February. The end of February is your second base period, or if you're seasonal, then you're going to pick any 12-week consecutive period between Feb 15, any of those two, or between May 1 and September 15. Okay, so you're going to basically have to show documentation in your loan of one of those base periods. And again, that'll be probably a special payroll report, or the summation of or a lot of submission of the several different payroll reports for that. Now, for non-payroll, you need to have a copy of the invoice. You need to have a copy of the lender amortization schedule, a copy of your, a bill for your rent. So those are, I think, pretty much well understood in terms of that. And then it's saying that here, the things that you're required to maintain but not submit. So this is some of the documentation that supports what goes into the worksheet. The table 1 that we looked at, and the table 2, which the table 1 is people earning less than 100,000 in any pay period in 2019, and table 2 is those earning more than 100,000. So you need to keep the documentation that supports those worksheets on hand. And any documents regarding any job offers and refusals. This is if you have somebody who you tried to bring back and they said no, they don't want to come. By the way, this is the extra detail that I was mentioning before here. So it's if you make an offer and it got refused, or if you had to fire for cause, or if you had a voluntary resignation, or a written request by employees for work schedules, those things can all affect the forgiveness. And so those you have to document too. And then you have to have the documents for the safe harbor calculation that we just looked at as well. So now none of these are going to get submitted to the lender, but these are all things that you're going to keep on hand, and they're saying you need to keep them on hand for 6 years. I know that's strange because it's not 7 years, which is kind of the tax amount, but it's in this case, it is 6 years. And you're basically, by signing off on this loan, you're giving the SBA and the government permission to go and look at those documents for that 6-year period.
Hey, Caryn, I think what's kind of challenging there is that if you go back on that one, it's saying have these documentations, but it doesn't give you a place to account for it earlier on in the application, really.
Well, these ones, Charlie, if you're referring to these are ones you're going to keep in a file at your office, or online.
Okay, but if I had a 40-hour-a-week person, that's a 1, right? That's a 40-hour-a-week person. It's full time. It's a 1, and they were on maternity leave for this period of time. Do I have a valid waiver, so I count them? Is that really what we should be doing?
Well, I think on that one, let me take that as a question. I prefer not to answer that one right online.
Sure.
I think for people who are on a leave, I think you're going to get a pass. But
you count them, but then document it later on why you counted them without them really working. Then you've got to figure out a way to make your payroll get up to that 75% because you may not have paid them during this period of time. Is that right?
That's right. And that question is applying, and we don't have perfect guidance on this either. There's another situation just similar to that, Charlie, where like a school whose employees go inactive halfway through for the summer, right? Halfway through.
Right.
Don't really have the guidance on that either on exactly how that works. So questions like those, I'd prefer to just take and list, and then what we'll do is we'll try to, and I'm sure you're getting all these questions, we'll try to, in the next time we do it, or we'll keep my website up to date and try to answer some of those questions with a little bit more care. The initial thinking though that I've seen, what I've read, the initial thinking is that somebody who's on maternity leave, they're not going to penalize you from that FTE calculation perspective. You're not going to be penalized.
So we count them, but I got you. And I kind of heard in there that you want to do this again. Is that what you were saying?
Well, I think we might want to do it one more time. It just says we get more
I'd love
guidance
it.
in a few weeks.
I'd love it. No, we've got a few questions here too. You and I will go over the questions a little bit too, and I think it'll be good.
Yep, exactly. And we'll have more. We
Awesome.
should have more. We should be getting more guidance. If the loan period is anything like the forgiveness period, we'll be getting more questions answered as we go.
Great, thank you.
And then, so those are documents, the documentation. A couple of other stuff. We kind of talked about this already, but I'll just mention again. If you don't get full forgiveness, don't worry about it. You can either prepay the loan, the rest of the loan that you don't get forgiveness for, or it'll just convert. And then, there's a huge list of unknowns, and I've just listed some. We've talked about most of these through the presentation here too. What we'll do is, as we get more answers, we'll share those with you. I think we've done as much Q&A as time allows, but keep the questions
we've got
coming.
a lot still. And Caryn, I'll tell you, we've got 94 questions that were unanswered. Some of them we addressed, and I'm going to go through them, but we answered about 30 of them as we were going along. And what we're going to keep doing is, I think you and I are going to keep talking, and I think it was really a lot of fun as you and I went through it with the application process. You hear what people are really having questions on, we can kind of help apply them, and we'll do it again.
Exactly.
What we'll be sending everybody is the video. It takes a while to convert it and get it so that we can upload it, but we will convert this. It's been fully recorded from the beginning, which has been some of Charlie's mistakes in the past, but we'll have the video, we'll have the slide deck, and then Caryn has a worksheet that she's working on, and we're going to get that all out to everybody as soon as we can. That sound good?
Sounds really good, Charlie. It's been fun as usual.
Caryn, thank you. It's been informative. I understand it a lot more. When I first read this, I was like, oh, this looks easy. This is great. You just fill it out as you go through. And then it's like, oh, what about this? And what about that? And what about? So, all right, that's awesome. But just the help that you've given us, Caryn, I really appreciate you. I know that ministries do as well. I've been getting great feedback from people. So we'll keep learning and going through it. All right?
We'll keep learning, and we'll get as many questions answered the next time as we possibly can.
No, we're getting it. All right. Thanks, Caryn. I'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.